So it looks like we've finished meeting all our requirements. So everything's starting to look pretty good. We've got everything squared away. So let's say you turn this plan in to whoever hands out the IP addresses in your organization. If it's just you and this is your private home network or office network, the sky's the limit. You can just go crazy assigning IP addresses. But a lot of times, if you're peeled off of a Class A or a Class B network, a lot of times the corporate IT people will just give you a block. And let's say you turned your plan out to the corporate IT people that hands out the IP addresses, and they say there is no way that they're going to let you take the zero network or part of the zero network or the whole 11 network for your, let's say this is your own remote office. It's your department. Normally it wouldn't be a 192 network, but we'll just ignore that for right now. And so they say that you have to stick within your own Class C network, and on top of it, you have to absorb 64 IPs out of the lab. So now we need to start trimming and really looking at how we're going to design our network. We want to keep our original requirements: 20 visitor IPs, 100 DHCP IPs, and 15 static. And right now it looks like we're doing pretty good. We've got about 15, 16 static IPs there. We have 127 DHCP IP addresses. So we're good there. The first thing you might say is, oh, well, we just need a subnet. So we'll come in here and carve off, let's see, what's our allowed subnets right here. So we need, for instance, this visitor router right here, we need 20 IP addresses. That looks like a 32 to me. So we'll come in here and just grab 32 IP addresses and say that's for the visitors, right? Let's see, this is the visitor network. Sorry, that's kind of hard to see, isn't it? But this needs to be subnetted. We only want to put one ACL in here to block this network right here. So, we don't want the visitors being able to get into our corporate LAN here. So we need to subnet this. Well, the problem with that is if we cut a swatch out right in the middle of our Class C for a subnet, then that is going to break up our DHCP addresses right here from our static IP addresses up here. And remember, we want to keep all this the same. We want all our employees' wireless devices, all our phones, and all our servers and printer and everything. We want that all in one network. So just cutting this out and giving it to the visitor network is not going to work. So now we're going to have to rethink this a little bit. Okay, we need to revisit our requirements so we can plan our subnets. So I'm going to add a few more rows here. Okay, so let's count up what subnets. We're going to need a lab network, so let's go ahead and add that in here. Network. And we need to, we have a visitor network here. I've already got that listed. And we're going to need a subnet for this point-to-point connection. So we'll say subnet for and what else? think that's it. So it looks like we're going to have this lab network needs to be 64 addresses. And the subnet for the point-to-point is going to be 4 addresses. So that's going to give us 1, 2, 3 subnets plus the subnet for our department. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 subnets altogether. Maybe we should just go ahead and write that out. And we're not really sure how big that is, so let's look at that real quick. We want to keep with our original requirements, so there's going to be 100 DHCP IPs, 15 static, so about 115. If we look at our allowed subnets, that should fit in a 128, okay? So let's just say it's going to be 128. Now you might be wondering why we don't need a subnet, a point-to-point connection subnet for the lab network. And that's because the lab network is going to be part of our department, and we don't need to block the IP addresses coming from the lab network. So they'll be able to get access or have access to everything in here, but they will be on their own network. Okay, to get started, another thing. We need 4 subnets, restricted visitor subnet, and we say 20 addresses. Let's try to fit it into let's make it 32 to make it fit in our allowed subnets. Okay, so the first thing we need to, or we should look at, is the domain and ranges of subnets. Now this is a stumbling block for experienced network engineers as well as beginners. And usually what I do to keep everything square in my mind is I pull up a sheet, make another sheet I should say, of our network. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up into the allowed subnets, so we make sure that when we subnet it out, that we're in the proper domain for that subnet. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second. Let's I want to put in the underlines here. Okay. We got 256 of these guys. Excellent. Okay, so you've seen this before where we just copied and pasted the networks here. And I broke it up into chunks of 4. Let's go ahead and copy this so we can make sure we keep this straight. Put it out here. Okay, this is the smallest. We're not going to do the 1 and 2 subnets. So we're going to start from 4. So 4 is the smallest, and this is it. So this is the domain. These IP addresses are the domain. So first let's start with the range of a subnet. So for our 252 subnet, our range is 4 IP addresses. The domain of this IP address is inside this subnet, and I know that sounds a little bit confusing, and hopefully it'll sound less confusing when we start going through this a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these subnets in each one of these rows, so we can look at the domains of the subnet of the IP addresses. So the first one is 4, because 4 is the smallest subnet we're going to have. The second one is going to be 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, and then, oops, and then 256. Okay, so what's these are our allowed networks. So what is the subnet mask for each one of these? Well, we're going to go ahead and add that in. So this one is going to be 256 minus 4. Oh, we need our equal signs in here. This is going to equal 256 minus what is right here, which is 4. So that's going to be our subnet mask. Yeah, and granted, this is remember, this is going to be there's 255, 255, 255 in front of this number right here. We're just subnetting our class C, so we're ignoring the network part of the IP address. Okay, so let's just do a copy and paste here. So here's all our net masks. Here's our allowed. So this is the range of the networks, if you will, and these are going to be the domains of them. So on a 4 network right here, we know that that's a little bit dark. We know this is going to be the range of it, and this is the domain of it. So if you have a 10.1, that's in the domain of this little subnet. And let's just put a block around him. Oh, it's incrementing it, so you just put an equals 4 in there, and that should stop that from happening. Let's try that again. Yep. Excellent. So we're just going to do this for the whole range in the class C. So if you have an IP address like 10.233 right here, this is going to be the wire address, and this is the broadcast for that address. And this is where you see a lot of the online calculators. It's breaking it up like this. So if you give a IP address of 229 with this subnet mask, the router knows this is the domain of that IP address. I hope this kind of makes sense. It's okay. So let's say it equals 8. Okay, so the next one is 8, which is right here. We're going to color him orange. And we're going to put a box around him too. And we're just going to copy and paste him all the way down. Okay, so this is the same concept. If you assign an IP address of 10.12 with a 248 subnet mask, the router is going to know that these are all the IP addresses within that domain. Okay, and let's see here, equals 16. Oops. Okay, 16 IP addresses. And you kind of see where I'm going with this, I probably. But I'm going to go ahead and just do the whole thing while you're watching, just so we're on the same page. Okay, and let's see. equals 32. Okay, let's get 32 IP addresses and color him green. Put a box around him. And you'll see later on why this becomes important, because if you remember that we were giving the default router the first IP address of the network, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You can give it any IP address, and so the router has to know what domain it's in and the range of the IP addresses. Oh, getting ahead of myself. I can't talk and color at the same time. Okay, 64 is going to be 2 of these 32s. The 128 is going to be, oops, lost track where I was at. Okay, so there's 64 and 128. And there's only 2 of those in this class C. And we won't do the 256 because it's basically the whole thing. You've seen that in the previous video. All right, so let's look at assigning these subnets, and I usually like to start with the biggest one. So the biggest one we're going to have is 128. So let's come back over to our sheet, and I do a lot of this in my head, but I just want to show you. So there's only 2 domains for a 128 network. It's either this lower domain, where the IP addresses start from 10.0 and go up to 10.127, or it's the upper range, where it starts from 10.128 and goes to 10.255. And since the department is basically my main LAN in our drawing right here, and everything else is hanging off of it, I want to use the lower network. Do I have to? No. But that's just makes more sense to me. So we're gonna say, and right in our sheet here is from 10 to 127 here. Let's see, how can we do this? Just draw an underline. That is going to be our first subnet, and so we want to move all this DHCP up into that network. So let's see here. First, let me clear this out. Delete that, and we need to fit we need 100 IP addresses. Is that right? Yeah. For our DHCP. So we're basically just going to move it right here. So it's not quite 100. So 10.32 minus 10.127. Oops. It's not quite 100. We could do some adjustments. And maybe we should do that. Let's look at what we've got here. I think I made this kind of big. So and this is our network equipment, if you remember. And since now we're breaking all this up, I think I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. So I'm going to make this first range right here part of the static IPs. which we can use the static IPs for network equipment. There's no rule about that. In fact, these are all static IPs. I just like logically keeping them separate, and so that'll free up these IP addresses right here. Let's see, let's clear this guy. Okay, so let's look at this, do a sanity check real quick. So we've got basically 12 IP addresses for the network equipment, okay, and we've got 12 to 27 static IP 15. Yeah, so that should work. That should be plenty. So and then we'll just make the rest of these the DHCP, and that should give us our 100 or close to it for static. I'm sorry, for the dynamic IPs or the DHCP IPs. Okay, and it all fits in the 128 network right here. So see the line I drew. Excellent. So that's pretty much done. And if you remember, I did start from the largest one first. So what's the second largest? Well, that's going to be the lab network, the 64. So, and this is where this drawing is really going to come in handy. So you might think, okay, well, you know, I can just pop it in anywhere, and you can actually. This will work right after 64. But if you tried to put a point-to-point right here, then you're going to be messing up your 64 subnet. And I'll show you a little bit what I mean here in a second. Okay, so we need a 64, and we need it after 128. So let's go down to, okay, here's our 128, or after 127, I should say. So here's the end of our first network. So we've got 2 domains for 64 IP address ranges. Okay, and we can either use the let's call it the lower, for lack of a better term, the lower domain or the upper domain. And I'm going to use the lower. I'm just going to stack on top of everything. And okay, so let's so we're going to go from, oops, we'll start from 128, aren't we? Okay, so we're going to use, here's the lower domain, and the upper domain starts at 192. So from 128 to 191 is going to be our 64 address lab network. So let's just, from 128 to 191 is going to be our lab network. Subnet, sorry. Okay. And are we using that color? Yes, we are. Let's find a different color. I forget what colors we're using. Let's use purple. I don't think that's being used. Nope. Okay, so this is going to be the lab network. Okay. All right, so we've got our lab network carved out. We've used everything before 192. So, oh, let's see what's next on our list right here. And that is the visitor network. So 32 IP addresses. So let's go here. And we're starting from right here, and we'll just peel out. Now, again, there's 2. I could either use this lower range and what we have left, or this upper range. There's 2 different subnets that we could use, but I'm going to just keep stacking on top of each other, and a lot of times if you do that, then you won't have problems. You won't have to draw this out. You can just do it in your head. But this really helps, especially if you're adding to an existing network. So we're just going to say from 192 to 223 is going to be our visitor network. to 223. I'll make him, yeah, that should be okay. This is our visitor network. Or I actually call it visitor subnet. Okay, so what else have we got here? Done the lab. So, oh, we need the subnet for the point-to-point, and we've done the department subnet, and we've done the visitor. So it looks like we just have one more. That's just a point-to-point. Let's go back to our sheet and look at what we've got going on here. So, let's see. Where did we leave off at? We left off at 224. So 224, right here. So this is where we left off. And what I'm thinking is I'm thinking I might want that point to point, instead of starting it at an odd, like putting it right here, because that's going to break up this 16. Yeah, I guess either way it's going to break it up. It's either going to break up the lower 16 or the upper 16 or the lower 8 and upper 8. So, yeah, I don't know. We can do a couple 4s. I don't know. I'm going to put it, I think I'm just going to put it right here. Why? I don't know. I'm going to break it up towards the end right here. So let's use this. So from 252 to 255 is going to be our point to point. 252 and oh, I don't know the colors here. I don't think we've used that. This is going to be our point to point for the visitor router. Okay, and I think that's it. So all this stuff is green now. Oh, what happened? All right, so let's add all this to the drawing. So first, our department network is still going to be in the 10. And it's going to start from 0, but our subnet mask is only 128. So see, that tells this router, since we're using an IP address out of the lower domain, since we're using an IP address for the router, or any IP address, so this is saying, okay, the wire is 0, and we're using 128. Well, that tells the router that this is the domain, it's using the lower domain, or 128 IP addresses for this network. Okay, and I hope that kind of makes sense. Okay, so so we got the subnet mask. That's going to cover all these guys. Let's do the lab network next. Let's go to our sheet here. And you remember how I calculated the 128, and we also did it right here. So okay, so the lab. Let's find the lab network. Here's the lab network. So it's using the upper. Our subnet mask is still going to be. Let's see here. What is our subnet mask for that? It's a 64. Oops. 64. So our subnet mask is going to be 192. Now don't confuse it. I know I'm looking at the top. That's just because I know where it's at. The 192 is just saying how many IP addresses it's using. The IP address actually tells it the domain. Okay, so, and like I said, hopefully this is making some sense. Okay, so let's go back. to our lab network, it's going to be 192.168.10. What was it? With a subnet mask of 255.255.255.192. Okay. And what is the domain? Okay, so it's 128. That's actually going to be the wire address. All right. And let's just write lab here, and this is going to be the wire address. And that means the broadcast address is this guy here. All right. This is the visitor. And this is going to be the wire address, the visitor subnet, and this is going to be the broadcast. Okay, so we've got, that's okay. We've got this one assigned. Let's do the visitor network next. Okay, so it's 192, so it's going to be 10.192. And with a subnet mask, so this is 64 IP addresses. What is 64? Oh, I'm sorry, it's 32 IP addresses, and the subnet mask for that is going to be 224. And yeah, like I said, don't confuse where I'm just looking at these numbers here. I'm not looking at the domain right now. So we just need a subnet mask of 224. All right. Okay, so the last thing we need is our point-to-point. Okay. And so let's just move that over here, point to point or visit router. This is going to be the wire address. Oh, yeah, that's right. This is going to be the broadcast for this network. So, I guess we'll just make him exact same color. Just call him broadcast. I'm just cleaning up here a little bit. Okay, so we've got wire broadcast for everything. Oh, we need to move it to our sheet. So the IP address for this guy is going to be, this is the router. The gateway router is going to be 10 dot. This is the IP address, not the network. So we're just going to make him 10.253 with a subnet mask of 252, which we already have there. So we're just going to we're going to come back to our sheet here and say this is going to be the gateway router, and this one right here is going to be the visitor router. Okay. And let's change the IP address here. This is 10.254. All right, that should do it. And let's go. Okay, so this is going to be our default gateway for the visitor subnet. And that will actually be assigned to this router right here. I could probably put he's going to be 93. Oh. Okay, does that make sense? So we've got the wire address, default gateway. So the visitors, when they get a DHCP address, it'll be within this domain. And they'll get one of these. In fact, maybe we just put DHCP out here so we know this is all DHCP. Actually, we might be able to. Maybe we'll start a DHCP right here. We'll use this in case one of these days we might want to throw a Ethernet switch or something else in there. Okay. So we'll just keep those open. And so that's this. Let's go look at our lab network. Our lab network, we're not going to assign anything. That's going to be for the folks working in the lab. They can. So, but what we are going to do is in our corporate router right here, the department router, we're going to give their box down here an IP address. And the reason why, so let's go up here and this is no longer accurate. And we're just going to go, let's just give them, so this is for the WAP. Visitor router's got its own point-to-point network, so we're not concerned about that. Yeah, so we're just going to give, this is going to be the lab network router, let's call it. And that's, so if there's a router right inside this guy, they'll be able to get out using this network. And so what I'll do is, in this gateway router right here, I'll put a route that says route 192.168.10.128 with this subnet mask, basically the whole subnet, out of this IP address right here. So it will actually, this IP address will actually live inside the lab. I'm just going to go ahead and, so it's going to have a .6, and this will be its IP address. And so when the folks in the lab want to route out, they're going to say, okay, well, we need to, you know, route out this .6 interface, and that way, that's how they're going to get out to the public network. Okay, so let's see what we got left. We've updated our drawing. We've assigned all our subnets. I think we're good to go.